How do you know what food sensitivities you have and how does it show up?
Today we talked to Christa Biegler, an award-winning dietitian and root cause nutritionist. She's the owner of Less Stressed Life Nutrition and helps people resolve issues without unnecessarily restriction or costly testing.
As a health coach and a wellness coach, we ask the questions so you get the answers. Let's get started as we ask.
Wait, what? How are you, Christa? Did I say your name right?
Yeah, you said my name is Christa, yes. And usually people mispronounce my first name, and I married into this last name, so no, who cares how we say the last name?
I
don't care, so who cares?
Okay. There's an L in it. I don't think I said the L, so
that's okay.
All right, I'm so excited. I have 1,000 questions for you, but right off the bat, I love you're a root cause nutritionist. What's the difference, in your opinion?
I think that it really boils down to being a questioner. I don't know if you've ever heard of Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies. I don't know what they all are, but I'm a questioner. And so I tend to feel like we never really get to the root of the root. And so that ends up being where some of my perspectives come from around food and testing and some of the things that we do in life and in functional and integrative and natural medicine is that sometimes we are going a little bit superficial. So I know we're going to talk a little bit about food sensitivities today. Food sensitivities are not root of the root cause. There is something under the hood of people having a reaction to food, for example. And so root causes have to do with systems inside the body being out of balance. And when things are out of balance, your body communicates. It communicates with symptoms. And so they're all just signals. And when we start to understand those signals, we can start to nourish those systems back into optimum function. And then these signals or symptoms disappear.
So does that mean like you ask a lot of questions to somebody like, if I said something hurt, you're going deeper and deeper and deeper and asking a ton more questions than it's typical?
I'm typically, my brain thinks in kind of like patterns and strategy. And those are just, we all have strengths, and my brain likes to think strategically in patterns. And I've always loved pattern recognition. So when someone tells me they have an issue, I'm listening for clues in the whole story. Often they'll give me enough in a paragraph where I can kind of go a couple directions. I mean, really the first step of anything is assessment, right? Assessment and triage. And so you're trying to figure out where to start and where to prioritize. Which system, for example, needs the most help or the most priority. So if you told me that, if you said, well, I suddenly started having energy crashes in the afternoon. Or maybe you say, I can't really get going until I have coffee in the morning. Right away, those are pretty dead. There's like the first one is a dead ringer that maybe your cortisol awakening response isn't very good. And so I might ask you some other questions related to adrenal function, cortisol awakening response. I might ask you from a severity perspective, I might start to ask you some other similar questions just to figure out what system seems like it needs the most support based on what symptoms do you think are the most distressing. I think in general, the first step for everyone is to do a comprehensive symptom assessment, symptom assessment, because you can't do anything if you don't know anything about it, right? Know better, do better. And so the first step is always assessment. And so awareness and assessment kind of go hand in hand. And sometimes we're not very aware that something we've always had is maybe not normal. So if you told me also, Leah, that you have a stuffy nose, I might ask you, when did that start? And when did it get worse? And how is it just in the morning and then it clears up? Or does it present more after you eat? And all of those things are going to give me some clues on what might be going on underneath the hood.
I didn't ask Leah about this, but can we take a couple of minutes and do like a little pretend visit? Say I came to your office. Sure. Is that okay? Because I'd like to understand this process a little bit more. So if I came to your office and I said, I'm always bloated. Whenever I eat anything, I'm just bloated. Mm-hmm. And I feel really uncomfortable and I've limited my food intake and I'm still bloated. And I feel like it's affecting my weight and I don't know what to do.
Sure. There's obviously a lot more. I would never believe you if you told me bloating was the only thing. And that's why I always want you to do a comprehensive symptom analysis, because there's always more. I always say it's a red flag if you think you only have one symptom. It's just that you have some symptoms that are more irritating to you. So I might ask you when you first started noticing it, part of this is understanding physiology. And so I'm just going to kind of interject right there and start to explain, because I don't have a full symptom assessment. So since we're going under the guise of like pretend analysis, what else do you think you might have going on, even if it's lower priority? Any other symptoms that stick out to you?
Maybe sleep issues and lack of energy and just hunger.
Perfect. Awesome. Love it. Okay, so let's start with your bloating example. And to understand the concept of bloating in general, one of the things I might ask you is if you're bloated all day or if you're bloated just after meals. And I think you said it was just after eating. Another thing that might happen is you might feel a little more, and this is a maybe, you might feel a little more brain fogged after eating. Even that symptom alone is generally poor digestion, and usually that undigested food is feeding dysbiosis in the gut, which is crossing the blood-brain barrier and causing some brain fog. But that's only brain fog in context of right after eating. Of course, you can get brain fog from all these other reasons. So bloating after eating is pretty straightforward. You want to think about, I always tell clients, no one was digesting. Go ahead and put that on my tombstone. And so in general, the transit time of the small bowel is 0 to 2 hours. So if you're bloated 0 to 2 hours later, you've got some dysbiosis that might be happening in the small intestine. Upstream, you might not have very good digestive enzyme adequacy, which, by the way, is shut down under stress. So if you're eating and working at the same time, it's always going to be a thing. So I think understanding the whole process from top to bottom is pretty key. And then it's never just about the small intestine. But I bring this up because if you go to your regular provider, we're finally kind of getting to where they're like maybe doing SIBO testing, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I don't get too attached to that. They're only really looking at 2 bacteria. We're quite a bit more interested in that as humans, because a lot of people, what comes to my office is refractory or unresponsive, or, hey, I went and they diagnosed me with SIBO, or they didn't, and then they treated me and I'm just back to where I started. So it's also upstream and downstream. So I said the small intestine transit time is 0 to 2 hours. So if you're bloated after eating, you're not digesting. And then when you don't digest things, those large particles feed the weeds in the gut. So if you imagine a lawn and you've got weeds and grass, the weeds steal the nutrients and they give off their own waste, right? They give off their own, like dandelions, they give off their own stuff. And so it's just like that in our body. We have weeds or dysbiosis that happen in our gut. We have good bacteria and not so awesome bacteria. And when we don't digest fully, we're feeding the not so good bacteria and pathogens. And then those have their own waste. They're organisms, right? They eat all the food and give off waste. So those endotoxins can cross that blood-brain barrier, give that brain fog I was talking about earlier. They will do some extremely basic things like cause some bloating. And that's kind of part of the story. And then actually that's part of how food sensitivities manifest and create issues. Because if someone's not digesting, for example, carbohydrates, and they're like, oh, I felt so much better when I restricted carbs, you're really just telling me you have gut imbalances and that you're not digesting. You don't have very good pancreatic enzyme production. You're not digesting well, and you're not utilizing that overall. So while restriction may give you some short-term gains, and I mean maybe up to a couple of years of gains, long-term, you still need to address what's really going on. That's not particularly the cause.
How would I know if I have a food sensitivity?
That's a good question. I could talk about this for a half hour. So let me crack open the concept first of all. And I guess you can ask a more specific question or interrupt me at any moment. Okay. But I'll try to get I'll attempt a 90-second flyby version. First of all, what is a food sensitivity? I think is important because I have found that very intelligent. I was just on a retreat with an attorney and she came and she had told me she had these few food allergies. And I said, that's interesting. Those don't strike me as allergies typically. How did you diagnose this? She said, oh, I did this blood test. So there's different types of food reactions. We universally agree about allergies. We kind of sort of have a stereotype in our brain about allergies, right? Anaphylaxis, perhaps, people having a reaction. Allergies are IgE reactions, like elephant reactions. I use a Nerf gun example to sort of help us quickly wrap our mind around this. If your Nerf gun is like shooting off red bullets, those are IgE reactions, right? And we usually think IgE reactions are consistent. Like if you did the test over and over, that the results would be the same. It's not always the case, but that's what's supposed to happen. That's why we agree about it universally and conventionally, etc. There are other food reactions that we don't necessarily completely agree about. Food sensitivities, namely, being one of them. So food sensitivities can be all these other different colored Nerf gun bullets. They're IgM, T cells, IgG, etc. So it's all these other types of immune system messengers that are going at the food. So here's what's happening in the body. Your body may consume food like an apple, like a perfectly healthy food. Like let's say you're eating an apple and it's not fully digested, but it starts crossing this membrane, this lining in the gut prematurely. And so the particles are too large. And the immune system on the other side is like used to it being in smaller particles, used to it being these little vitamins and nutrients that it can move around, shuttle around the body and use at different systems, right? These nutrients are workers in the body. But let's say that it doesn't get down to the nutrient status, right? It's just these bigger particles. Then when it crosses this barrier prematurely, which can happen if the gut is permeable, meaning it looks more like fishnet tights instead of nylons. So it should be
Is that
permeable.
leaky gut? Is that what you're talking about?
So that is an analogy, right? So leaky gut kind of looks like fishnet tights instead of nylons, which is more semi-permeable. Only smaller particles could get across a semi-permeable membrane. So if you have these larger particles crossing prematurely, the immune system's like, what is this? This isn't a normal thing. And this is when your immune system starts reacting to perfectly healthy foods, and especially foods you eat all of the time. And so there are a variety of food sensitivity tests. It's a little, I mean, I've been in this industry for a while. So like in my brain, I feel like its heyday is over, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm not getting ads anymore for food sensitivity testing like I once was. I'm actually getting ads now for vaginal microbiome testing all the time. So that tells me what's happening in the industry and the market.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
I know. It's so funny. So unfortunately now you're going to get ads for that after this, right? Because I said it out loud and your phone was sitting here listening. So anyway, around 5 to 10 years ago, even anywhere between 2015 to 2021-ish, there was a lot of advertisements for food sensitivity tests.
I took one.
Yeah, and there was a very popular one called Everlywell, and it was just an IgG reaction. So that was just one Nerf bullet. There's a couple on the market that will actually measure multiple types of Nerf bullets, right? So multiple types of end reactions, and some of them are practitioner tests. What a lot of people discovered when they did IgG testing was that they showed reactive to things they ate a lot. And part of that's just classical leaky gut. It's like whatever you're eating, whether it's quote unquote healthy or not, starts to become something you're reactive to. So the point of food sensitivities is that they are very malleable. It can change fairly quickly. And this isn't right or wrong. I mean, I did a lot of food sensitivity testing and execution for many years. And there's a reason I don't really do it very often anymore. I will say that someone with autoimmune conditions tends to have a bigger return on investment from something like that. Just in general, they'll tend to have a bigger return on investment to changing their diet because there's more of a shift in the body. So you asked a question, what are I think you said, how do I know if I have food sensitivities? Yeah. Well, if you have any potential issues in the gut, so there's some very common symptoms that come with food sensitivities. It might be bloating, but I kind of started this interview by saying, you asked me about being root cause, and food sensitivities are still at the surface. They're just like barely under the hood, whereas the things that cause food sensitivities are farther down the root cause rabbit hole, if that makes sense.
I never even knew that something else causes a food sensitivity.
Yeah, that's how you can reverse food sensitivities without being overly restrictive, because they're not permanent.
Can you give me an example?
Can you be more specific?
Okay, so like if I have a rash and I think it's from food, something, and I stop eating that food, you're saying there's something else beyond just stop eating that food?
Sure. So let me give you a very good example given that context, because I think the more specific we are, the more interesting, or like the more in depth we can go.
Right.
So I work with a lot of skin issues. And so there are a lot of reasons that we have rashes. So first of all, a rash is one sign that you are not digesting well, whether you think you're bloated or have normal bowel movements or not. There is something going on because the skin grows from the inside out. Okay. So if you stop eating, let's use some stereotypical examples, gluten or dairy, and your rash improves. There are many reasons that can happen. Let me start with a very common one that links to the conversation we were just having. Okay. So conventionally, we don't really believe in food sensitivities. You can't go to the allergist. They're going to say like food sensitivities are baloney, but we kind of do agree about them. There's something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And so, you know what celiac is? It's when all the villi in the small intestine are flattened because you cannot tolerate that particular protein, right? That's in wheat and other gluten containing products like rye and barley, etc. So that's celiac, where it straight up flattens the intestinal villi, which is like really terrible because that's how you absorb nutrients. But then there's people who have many symptoms from gluten and they test negative for celiac. That's called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So even though the provider may say there's no such thing as sensitivities, we could still kind of agree that there's sensitivities with just that example alone.
Right.
So there's one potential example. There are some, probably 50% of my skin clients have some kind of mild to moderate current or past mold or mycotoxin exposure. And if you get a mold or mycotoxin exposure, which happens, I mean, anytime anything is wet for more than 24 hours, I think we have to like diffuse this like stressful conversation. We can make it more chill. Like it's a skill to understand is all I'm saying. Like I've had many times where I could have had mold growth from a utility room flooding or something. And there's just skills like you.
It's so weird that you said this.
Yeah.
It's so weird because Leah actually had mold growing inside the wall of her bedroom.
Yeah, but I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the club. You and many, 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 many people. So let's talk about your case, but I'll put a bow on the current question, which was, well, what if I stop eating these foods and my skin stuff gets better? Mold simply makes you look reactive to tons of food categories, including pretty much all carbs, pretty much all histamines, which is a ton of things. It's like anything from bananas to avocados to strawberries, and it's dose dependent. So it's like it's not like one of those will necessarily bother you, but it will typically make you look very reactive to gluten, dairy, histamines, even oxalates. It depends on the severity overall. So it's going to make you look more reactive, but as you clear the mold from your body, which naturally is going to accumulate, it's an organism that wants to stay alive, just like all the rest of us. And it's a very aggressive fungus. And so it'll cause a lot of fungal symptoms. It'll cause a ton of, if I was going to assess symptoms, like some dead ringer symptoms of you have had exposure, would be any kind of like mild congestion or like routine, or if it was in your bedroom wall, I would expect it. Maybe she wakes up with a very slight sore throat, but then it goes away. Or maybe she wakes up with a little bit of joint pain, but then it goes away. Or maybe she wakes up with a little bit of congestion, but then it gets better throughout the day. All of those things would be questions I would have. It could be anything like itchy ears, itchy eyes, whatnot, skin issues, etc. So any kind of itchiness or any kind of fungal symptoms, it's just an aggressive fungus. And so it sort of taxes all the systems. So remember at the very beginning, I said, I'm all about supporting the systems to operate optimally. Yeah. It's just one of those things. And it's such a spectrum of how significant it is and how you personally metabolize and tolerate it, right? So genetically, like 50% of us don't metabolize it very well. So that might look like your husband did better with it than maybe you did. It depends on any past exposure as well. I grew up and had, exposures in my college apartment and then my childhood basement bedroom. But again, mild enough where it wasn't majorly negatively impacting my life. I just had some dry skin in the winter that I thought was like not problematic until it became a bigger thing later. So anyway, mold will just make you look reactive to a ton of things. And then as you start to clear it from your body, your tolerance for those foods improves.
All right, let's follow this thread because it's really fascinating to me that you've potentially have diagnosed Leo after she's visited at least 4 or 5 doctors.
It's great that you found. I think it's great that you found the mold in your bedroom. Tell me about how you found it and why you looked for it.
Now I'm like, there's got to be more in there somewhere. We only took down one wall.
Yeah. So,
but I also don't have the money to go take down all the other walls. So
I wouldn't necessarily tell you have to take down all the walls. Do you know, was it your window wall? Was it adjacent to a bathroom?
No, it was just the wall of the back wall of our house. And we were siding it. We were residing it. And as we resided it, we were like, oh my gosh, this is moldy. And then we peel a layer. And it was just, so we had to take the whole back wall down. In the meantime, like I've always off and on battled bad scalp psoriasis everywhere. And recently joint pain, like really bad joint pain, like getting steroid shots for the pain.
Yeah, then I would definitely want to pursue this, right? Because the symptom is quite significant. And joint pain is a sneaky symptom of mold stuff. Unfortunately, once you see mold, it's really hard to unsee it. In people, you're like, oh, snap, everything could be this actually. And I don't mean it in some weird, crazy way. I'm trying to diffuse it. So there's multiple things you can do. I'm a huge fan of what can we do for like $50 or less in assessment and kind of diagnostics. Unfortunately, having someone come and inspect is not, I think you need to first inspect yourself. And that's exactly what you did. And I would ask you, why was that side? Why was I would assume the plywood underneath the siding moldy in the first place? How did moisture get under there and mold that product. Now, something tricky and kind of a misnomer is that people think I have new construction, I could not have mold. Unfortunately, the way we build, sometimes things still get quite wet and then mold grows depending on that humidity. So I don't know if it happened in the building process, but of course there's all kinds of things that happen with construction. So I would be asking, how did it get along that wall in the first place? Like, happened, that's where I'd want to trace, because you're basically, with mold, you're tracing water and moisture and humidity. So one of my tips or tricks is to do humidity monitoring. You can pick up a 3 or 4 pack of humidity meters for like $20-ish. Please don't get one. It'll be hard to do this experiment because people have said, oh, I got one and I moved it around. I'm like, you could do that with a couple of them, but it's kind of hard to do. Like, let's say you have 2 bathrooms, Leah.
Yeah.
I'd want you to have a humidity meter in each bathroom so you could see what the baseline is. You're going to expect that the humidity is going to go to 100% after a shower, but it should really reduce back to baseline within about 2 hours. If not, you might have an opportunity to improve ventilation. Now, where does that vent fan go? I mean, this is getting a little environmental, and I try to stay out of environmental. I mean, I'm a body practitioner, right? But I just like to help people get their mind moving on, like, okay, where could it be coming from? So we're always looking usually first at rooms that have potentially high humidity, and there's all kinds of, really mold is sort of inevitable with a lot of scenarios, right? Like cracked grout. And I'm not saying it's like the end of the world, but it's like if you had a whole wall that was moldy enough for you to say, what's going on here? You'd want to see how significant, like you'd want to ask yourself, how and why would that happen? So I don't know where you live in general, but usually the sweet spot for humidity is between 40 to 60% in general. There's really something to be said about hitting the sweet spot instead of being too low. It'll really dry out your skin in general for those of us that already run a little bit dry. And I remember you guys also live in the upper Midwest, we'll call it, I guess. And so just like me, a lot of people have forced air heat, maybe fireplaces, different things. And so it's really interesting. We have a cabin with a fireplace and the humidity can get so low. I have geothermal heat at my house. And so it's more of a moist heat. So my humidity is like 43%, super comfy in the winter. Whereas a lot of people, when they turn on their, and I've lived in this home for 15 years. So you sort of forget other things, And so when I'm at the cabin with the fireplace and I'm not like putting moisture back in the air, and I was running the fireplace this week, it was under 30%, which is like so dry. And actually there's some studies that show like the flu virus will actually survive like in too low or too high of humidity. So anyway, back to the humidity meters, you should get a few, and I would put them, your room and then different rooms to just see like, what's the baseline in my bedroom? Is it higher than a different room across the other side of the house, right? A totally separate area. Because if you have a change in different rooms, more than 10%, that might lead me to believe like, what the heck is going on? Because usually with mold, there's some moisture stuff. You also don't necessarily have to rip off a wall. You can also get a thermal gun. You can now get them for under $200. I think that's the next like higher cost thing I would probably do to sort of try to understand, where do I have temperature fluctuations? This can be important from an insulation perspective and an energy efficiency perspective, as well as, is there mold growing here or not? And I personally think that that's smarter than a lot of the other like home tools you could get. And I know that everyone wants to hit an easy button and have someone else figure it out for them. It's just that it's not really, it ranges between having someone come over and do $300 and doing 2 air samples, which is absolutely worthless unless it's like super severe and like crazy in the air. So it's just like a waste of money, to multiple thousands of dollars of testing. And it's like, I'm just saying, there's a lot of things none of us want to know how to do. This weekend, I was like changing thermostats. I do not want to know how to do that, but such is life. So
I don't want to interrupt you for a second. So say she did all of the testing and she figured out there was a problem with mold in her house, and it's probably something that's affecting her body. Sorry, I'm speaking for you, Leah, but what is the next step? What are the things that you would do to help her mitigate the mold within her body?
Yeah. So first of all, let's finish the first part of the conversation. And it's sort of like a big topic. It's not really a small topic. And unfortunately, Google isn't very helpful with this. Whether we like it or not, I've just had a significant amount of personal and client experience with this. And so first of all, the conversation is, if you're pouring a bunch down the top of the funnel, you have to think about it like this, because what's in your body needs to be cleared out. But if you're constantly inhaling it right now, it's gonna be pretty hard it's like trying to like scoop water out of the boat, but there's just like a hole in it, right? It's just going to keep filling up. So that's why doing some kind of assessment is not something you can really skip. And I'll just also put like I'll give you the easy button. For us, the easy button is to do an ERMI test. It's about $300. And then we have an environmental consultant we refer people to professionally interpret it for about $100. You will not find something cheaper aside from your own home assessment with flashlights and humidity meters, etc. And I just mean from a perspective of like, that's good home maintenance in general, but we often don't know anything about home maintenance until we experience it. It's just life, it's just how all of that stuff goes. So first of all, you have to understand that if you continue to have a hole in the boat will continue to fill with water and you will have a hard time clearing the symptoms. Okay. So that has to be assessed and understood to some extent before you go after what's going on in the body. Because there's two giant buckets. It's like, what is the status of the exposure and where is it, right? Is it in the home versus the work versus, it's all over the place for people, right? So we want to kind of track back, like when did the symptoms start? Because often also I want to tell you, it doesn't necessarily mean you moved into a house and it was full of mold. It might be something else that happened along the way. We had a few years ago and I had 4 water intrusions that year. So I just had to kind of like be there. I had to see it and address it and take care of it. And then once you're addressing the body, context is important, but essentially there's 3 primary pieces to addressing mold, and it's kill, bind, and detoxification, essentially. So I think about it like this. This is my analogy for it. Let's pretend you're in the kitchen and you have a bunch of dust in the air. The killing, the antifungals, which can be anything from herbal to prescription, the antifungals essentially kill that, like take that dust out of the air and put it on the floor. And then to bind is sort of the dustpan or the mop. We're going to kind of like clean up that dust or that dirt as it comes out of the air. And then detoxification is pulling from the tissue. And this is sort of why I have a job, because if you do this too much, too fast in the wrong order, you will feel much worse. And usually you will dump it all on your skin and have a worse of a rash. And so that's literally like what I try to help people avoid all the time. Detoxification is sort of sweeping from underneath the oven and under the fridge. It's pulling the other crap out that's sort of like stuck under the tissue, in general. And generally at any point, even if Leah, I'm absolutely not suggesting that you would move. That would be a flight response of the nervous system if you move before you inspect, which I have people do, and then they move into different, more moldy houses as well. So all kinds of things I think just there's so much opportunity to just educate people to understand that we can diffuse this whole situation. But anyway, detoxing prematurely will dump it on the skin overall. And there is like kind of an art to doing it in the most gentle way so you don't increase all of your symptoms, etc. So your question was, how would Leah detox or like clear this mold?
Yeah.
It's essentially, think of it like having a full bucket. And I don't expect that your bucket will be totally empty. It's a little bit of a process and a project. But maybe your goal would be to get your bucket a third of the way empty or half empty. All of that would massively reduce symptoms. And I would go about that in maybe like a 3 to 4 month increment overall. There's all kinds of things that you can do. Even using sauna plus binders can be super beneficial. You can clear all kinds of things through the skin, technically. Not shocking.
At a sauna?
At an infrared sauna.
Infrared sauna.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's like the simple, basic one-liner, but there's tons of options. It's just a matter. And I love podcasts for this purpose, is that we can sort of break it open into lots of things. Cause it's like, oh, you want to know what the actual root cause of something is? Well,
do you have like a chart that's up. Like, this is what I have. What's the like root cause? Like you know what I mean? Like what are potential root causes of it? Cause it's so fascinating. I never even thought of it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I do on like the back end. On the front end, I don't necessarily, but I do have like I do have a really good list of curated podcasts about mold that I will want to share with you after the fact that will help you. Because part of it, how I think you guys know this, right? Sometimes I always think this is sort of a opinion that I feel is very true, but education can be your best defense, and your opportunity or if you have a little bit more education about this, it will save you like $1 bajillion and a lot of stress.
And a million doctor's appointments and all of that.
So most people don't necessarily recognize mild to moderate mold, and that's why we sort of need long form conversation, because people don't necessarily think it's a thing. So you can absolutely do testing. So I talked a lot about environmental testing. I like to I like to be considerate of expenses, right? And so I don't necessarily think we all need to do like thousands of dollars worth of testing. And I kind of educate about that, and I used to test everyone for a decade, and it's like, okay, cool. I think I can tell you what's wrong with you often without this test, right? If I just ask really good questions. And so to that end, like I have a 3-page questionnaire about mycotoxin symptoms. And so the only barrier is whether someone is kind of open-minded to, oh yeah, I could have had a past exposure, or maybe I have a current exposure, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. And so education is necessary as part of the awareness and the assessment process.
So I know we spent some time talking about Leah specifically, but what the takeaway I'm getting from this is that there are things that are happening in our body that are causing symptoms like joint pain or bloating or skin irritation, or just run down the gamut of things that we deal with that don't necessarily, you can't say I have the flu or I have a cold or I have a whatever, because we don't know. And in investigating that, which I think is your job, then you come up with potential solutions for really attacking the root of the problem instead of just symptomatic relief.
Right. And I would say that's kind of I really got to thinking about, the problem is with really being a questionnaire and loving root cause is that you find that a lot of our solutions are just very superficial. And so for me, I love relapse prevention as well.
Yes.
I love people to get better and then to not continue to relapse, or not just to play whack-a-mole. And there are so many instances over my career where it's like, that was actually contributing to a slight bit of whack-a-mole. And so the antidote to this, to me, is, like I was talking about earlier, having some awareness over symptom assessment, being able to categorize those symptoms into different systems, and then understanding how to support those systems from a really holistic perspective. I mean, most of those systems are very nutrient dependent. It's basically physiology blended with things that actually work, which is evidence-based medicine is a triad. It's what's in the research plus the clinician experience plus the client experience. All of those things make up evidence-based medicine. And so it's really that. It's physiology, which is literature and beyond. It's what we consider the truth, right? It's how the body works. Plus, Leah, like your experience provides the context for exactly what you do, because the answer might look a little different for different people, because you need to tailor it to that person, what they're willing to do, their symptoms, etc. Right? Like I said, it's sort of a spectrum overall, and then my experience. But yes, to answer, to kind of close that question in general, symptoms are all coming from some kind of overwhelm, imbalance, deficiency in those systems. So when you support those systems to run optimally, so something like mold, for example, taxes all the systems. It really taxes drainage and detox, which is why joint pain, probably fatigue at any time of the day, to be honest, and skin issues are very duh. All of those are signs of poor drainage and detoxification. It taxes the microbiome because it's massive fungal overgrowth. So it's a specific type of weed, a very toxic type of weed that sort of is creating dysbiosis and imbalance in the system, and it's eating up a lot of nutrients. It's because it's a bit more aggressive than straight up fungus. And then it also taxes the stress hormones inconveniently. So it's taxing the adrenals, which taxes cortisol production and all of its little friends, and thyroid, etc. So it sort of looks like everything, unfortunately.
Okay. So I know we talked about physical things like the bloating, the skin, the joint pain. What about anxiety? Is that something that has a root cause of a root cause of a root cause? You know what I'm saying?
Yep. So anxiety is part of a symptom. This is where my brain goes if you bring up anxiety. There's 2 main areas that it goes. Anxiety is increased about 30% if the thyroid is sluggish. That alone needs me to stop and say, I don't really care if your blood labs for your thyroid look normal. That is not root cause enough. If you have sluggish thyroid symptoms, so let me just list off some symptoms. There's the typical ones, like feeling cold hands and feet, hair loss, and general fatigue. And then there's the more sneaky ones like dry skin, dry hair, slow motility, which looks like I need coffee to poop, squirrel brain, feeling like you have ADHD. Those are all some of mine. Those are some of the ones that strike me. Depression and anxiety. All of those are really hey, maybe my thyroid is not working optimally. And by the way, the root cause of that not working goes back to those other systems as well, because they all sort of dance together. They're all nutrient dependent. So your adrenals need to work well. Your thyroid gets converted finally through the liver. So if it's taxed from mold, like it's never, Hashimoto's very commonly, by the way, is like, there's often a root cause component to mold. So anyway, back to anxiety. So thyroid, but you have to know that there's more underneath thyroid. And then also with anxiety, histamine responses can look quite diverse as well. So let's talk about that for a hot second, because this is really important. I see all these people talking on Facebook groups. I just like sometimes need to delete my Facebook account because it feels like a cesspool, the feed, right? Like, where are all this coming from? No one posts anything.
Right.
It's all this crap from different groups. And I saw this woman, actually it was an ad for a nasal strip. And she's like, I have histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome. And she's like, so of course I have stuffy nose. And I was like, so you mean you're living in mold is what she actually means. So she like opened, I mean, this is literally what it's like being in my brain, scrolling Facebook. I was like, this poor girl is just living in mold. And she is trying to open up her sinuses. Anyway, but when you have histamine issues, the symptoms can look like typical things like you would think about with allergies, itchy eyes, etc. It can look like red skin or raised and red skin, or like heat issues, like trouble regulating temperature in general. But some of the trickier ones can be like a fast heart rate or heart palpitations or anxiety as well. So for me, my symptoms sort of manifest as a lot of skin stuff, some low energy, etc. But the other girl that I've worked with very closely for 7 years, her histamine symptoms present as like severe anxiety. So it sort of depends on, this is why one symptom isn't really enough, right? We want to look at like, what's the pattern of lots of symptoms? And so, if I was assessing you, Leah, you'd be like, I have this and this, and this sounds like mold. Cool. So then you'd want to, find out if you had it, right? So you have this luxury, whether you think so or not, that you saw it. So you already have accepted it in your brain, like, oh, it's there. Your brain might be a little bit stuck on like what to do next, because you said that when you said, well, I'm not tearing down the rest of my walls. Cool.
Right.
And you need to know if one option you have is, are you massively filling the bucket? Like, how do you, what are you going to do to sort of assess that in general? And the answers there's many right answers. I think sometimes people find it frustrating. There's not necessarily one right answer. It's like, what's the right answer for me at this time for what I want to do? Right.
I feel like I didn't even get to any of the questions that I had for you.
Well, welcome to having
you have like, I know, and I know you have to go, so we don't want to keep you longer than.
We have 13 minutes. You guys, we can cover so much more.
What other
rock and roll?
Where are you at? Because I'm also like just in awe.
Okay, so I guess where I missed a little bit of connection is, if a person thinks they have and you probably explained this, but I need it to be like dumbed down a little bit.
Sure, I'd love to.
If a person, like, I think I have a food sensitivity to X, Y, and Z, and I've been trying an elimination for the past 3 months, how would a person, not specifically me, but how would you know, like, how do you investigate what is actually the root cause? How do you figure that out?
Perfect. Okay. So one of my values in business is like helping connect the dots. So thank you for asking, that a different way. So I can try to, and I would say like, probably one of the challenges we have as humans is we sort of try to be too broad or too hypothetical, and then we don't get, as deep into it as. So the first place I want to go with your question is, hey, I have a food sensitivity. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'd actually want to know what the symptoms are from that food sensitivity to do a better job. But first, I'm just going to talk about how I think we should approach elimination diets or adjusting the diet.
Yeah.
It depends on how restrictive it is, but let's just apply a bit of science here, or immunology specifically. So you have certain white blood cells that have a half-life about 10 to 14 days. Some of them have like a much longer half-life, meaning, well, I'll explain in a moment. Some have a longer, some have a shorter, but a lot of them have a half-life or a lifespan essentially of 10 to 14 days or approximately 2 weeks. So if you're going to do a food elimination diet, it sort of depends on how you do it. I like to just do a one fell swoop, like the most intense version, for about 2 to 3 weeks. After 2 weeks, I usually start broadening and expanding path of least resistance. It's not like we just go to Dunkin' Donuts and add. It's like, oh, I add the path of least resistance. So it depends on what kind of elimination diet you're doing, first of all. Can you tell me what kind of elimination diet you did specifically, and then I can answer this better?
So I eliminated the main triggers: gluten, sugar, dairy, lentils, corn, soy, peanuts.
How did you decide on that list? I don't really care, but you brought it up like it was a fact, and I thought that was interesting. You were like, I eliminated the main triggers. So where did you come up with that particular
I've been working
list?
with a nutritionist.
Okay, cool. So that was her list of things. Okay, fine.
Correct.
So when you brought that up, I was like, because when you said main triggers, I thought you were going to tell me the top 8 allergens. And that's not what you did. So that's why I was just curious. So there's different spins on how people think you should eliminate food. And I don't really care. To be honest, I think as long as you did, I think it's easier to do like all the things initially. What I would do when I was doing food sensitivity testing all the time is we looked at the least reactive foods. So often I think we do it upside down or a little bit backwards. We're like, I'm just going to restrict these 10 things, right? Which is somewhat like you just recommended. What we did was we had a list of 170-ish things. We had the lowest inflammatory. So that tells us like, what's the lowest inflammation? And we just created foods based out of those like 50 ingredients. And then we added from there after 2 weeks, like one thing per day, essentially. So my point is if there's a half-life of about 2-ish weeks for a lot of foods, I think that after 3 weeks, you should be able to, this is the importance of assessment, because I think you should have a multiple symptom questionnaire or a broad assessment of all symptoms before you start. And then at the 3-week mark of doing it, because you should see a decent improvement. A good improvement's 50% of symptoms. An okay improvement's 25% improvement. If you're not seeing that amount, then it's probably not enough anyway. And the root cause of food sensitivities is typically something going in with digestion, how your body's metabolizing and utilizing that food, some kind of dysbiosis in the system. There's actually a couple of things that inform the immune system or the gut, and they are dysbiosis, stress chemistry, what's going on with the stress and nutrient profile, etc. And there's also some other things like environmental. We talked about mold as an environmental component. Even getting a concussion or like brain inflammation can massively create that, etc. So what you did, it sounds like, was you were like, I'm just gonna guess with these common triggers that people have, right? Based on recommendations. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of skills that get built with that. And this isn't probably new to you, but just to back it up in general, we learn a lot when we decide to change our diet, right? There's just like a lot of things that happen. We learn like how to use things differently, et cetera. It's like a set of skills we sort of acquire. So I don't think that's bad. There's just multiple ways to do it. So you did we'll call it a generic version, which I think is great. I actually think that's a perfect place to start for everybody. What I don't like is when we don't see results and we keep doing it forever. We don't make changes. Or I don't like when we see results, but we don't get deeper to the root causes of those foods. And so what happens is people shrink their diet more and more and more. And now we've got bigger problems because now we're communicating that food is stress to the body in general. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of reasons I could go into like how that's happening, because in general, the fact that you have food sensitivities in the first place tells me that there's something out of balance or not working optimally. And so when you restrict further on a system that's already taxed and not digesting well and absorbing well, now you're essentially undernourishing. It's an extremely common thing in a very intelligent, healthy population. We restrict more and more, and then eventually we end up in a place of hypersensitivity where we're starting to react to lots of things. It's a good time.
So people have told me, oh, if you stop eating it altogether, then you're going to be even more sensitive. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying something different?
Yes, that's what I'm saying, depending on what the root causes are, because the root causes include what's going on in the gut, imbalanced digestion, etc., stress chemistry, which isn't going to be solved by restricting your diet completely forever. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to that. And then some of these other factors overall. Right. So you did a generic approach, which is perfect to start with, because there's a lot of benefit that can be gained. But if you can't measure progress, then what are you doing? So there's that option. You could do a test. So I skip over that part now. I started my business doing that kind of testing, and it was great. And I would say for an autoimmune condition, it can be supportive, but I like to move efficiently. And so I'd like to have people do like a 3-week experiment and then broaden. When I hear that you've been doing, and I know that a lot of practitioners say like, just do this for like 3 months. Okay. Maybe there's a lot of different reasons that might be helpful or not helpful. I mean, I think it just depends on what your baseline was when you started. You're probably above average. So you probably didn't start on there's a couple points people can start from. A standard American diet, which if they're going to do an elimination diet, they're probably, getting rid of preservatives and artificial colors and all kinds of things. So it's like, generally you're putting less toxic burden and hard to digest stuff in, right? But you may have started from a healthy whole foods diet. If you're already starting from a healthy whole foods diet and then you restrict for 3 months, and it's starting to wear on you and cause more stress and you're losing the joy in your life, then I would suggest that there's other options at that point for sure. I hope that helps. So it sort of depends on how you started, what you did, etc. And I always like to use stories. Your story is just common, so it's not abnormal. But I would love to tell people, if you aren't assessing symptoms like in totality before and at a midpoint, then how do you know what's happening, right? Overall, if you're not measuring, how do you know what your improvement is? If you're not improving, then what are we doing, right? Obviously, we're not getting to the point. And so you have the generic perspective, you have a testing perspective, or what I do now is I just go to the root causes of food sensitivities, which are addressing imbalance in the gut, digestion, stress chemistry, et cetera, the things that actually influence the immune system.
So do you go more towards, I mean, I'm sure it's a multifactorial approach, but like supplements and then elimination or adding in extra foods? What is your general approach?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily, people always come in like, what should I be eating? I was like, I'm not going to restrict you more. We can look at your baseline and then I can look at what your baseline is and make some slight tweaks. But usually by the time people get to me, they have already tried other things. And so they're sort of tired of that. And I'm not a particularly dogmatic person, mostly because I like to enjoy life and food. And then it's hard to understand the benefit of that unless you've ended up in kind of the situation like you're dealing with right now, potentially, right? And I'm speaking, maybe people will say like, oh, I've eliminated this and I'm happy. Fantastic. Whatever you like, everybody do you. So I come in and not surprisingly, the first step for me is assessment and prioritizing, understanding like which system is in the most duress, because there are people that have become, especially in the last 5 years, more hypersensitive, and they're going to need to go essentially put back workers at the machines in the body before they can do anything else. Like they're just going to overreact to everything if we don't do that, if we don't calm down the immune system. Freaking out, and you kind of gotta like calm it down, chill it out. And I call it fake it till you make it. Give it some anti-inflammatory inputs, do some nervous system work, give it some nutrients, etc., specific to stress hormones. So I call this triage or priority process. Or can you just go in and start attacking the root cause, which is bringing the gut into balance, improving digestion and improving drainage and detoxification. Those are two major areas where you can kind of like the road diverges. You're going to end up getting back to them no matter what. It just depends on how are you presenting and how significantly are you presenting that tells you where you can go first. So you asked me, what's my approach? It's not restricting more typically, because usually people who come into me already have a really healthy whole food diet. It's just that they're not actually digesting, absorbing, utilizing that food. It's not food that's the enemy. Remember that example we have with the apple? It's a healthy food, right? If someone wants to be dogmatic about it, like knock yourself out. Like that'll work for a while. Usually the most dogmatic people come around after a few years, typically, I find. So I'm kind of past that point of my career. But anyway, we talked about that with the apple. It's like the apple wasn't the problem. It was how your body was processing the apple overall, how the immune system saw it in the body, how it shot off immune system mediators, and then it caused symptoms overall. So to answer your question further, we have a couple more minutes. What, if you want to tell me hypothetically or accurately, what are the symptoms that you are maybe trying to correct? That you would
let you go, because I think you're talking to me or to Leah.
You're bloating. You did the elimination diet.
So I eliminated things because I can't figure out how to get rid of my bloating. I've been on antibiotics in 2024, probably 4 or 5 times. I feel like that was a factor.
Of course it was.
My theory is that I have some SIBO, or
Yeah.
the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And when I ask people in the medical field, they sort of laugh me off, and so
Because
I don't
they don't
get an
think about
answer.
it like that. Right.
Right.
So
They're like,
so
no, people
so
don't get that.
perfect. Okay. So I can jump right from there. So first of all, of course they say that. And I always say like, we don't blame them. They're really good at diagnostic imaging and like sticking a camera in certain places and things like that. But as far as bacterial balance, optimizing the terrain, improving digestion, it's sort of like we have a grossly unimpressive toolbox conventionally. So I'm not surprised that you've run into walls. We are generally accepting SIBO as like, oh, it's a thing, because we have a very clear-cut test, right? And that's kind of the thing conventionally. It's like we have this reproducible test that we can see things over and over and over. So remember we talked about earlier, SIBO is upstream and downstream. That's why people don't resolve SIBO overall. And if you're using antibiotics, it's going to kill all the grass and the weeds. And you and I, Leah, all know when you kill grass and weeds, what grows back first? The weeds.
The weeds.
Yes. So there's something with antibiotics. There's a difference between antibiotics and herbs. They work differently. And so there's multiple things to do here. There's going to be vagus nerve stimulation support, improving digestive function. There's going to be a couple layers of how to do that, correcting the imbalance, because it's not just methane or hydrogen, which is what they're testing for SIBO. It's like, that's such a, I mean, we're so much more interesting than two bacteria, right? And so it's not just that, of course. But anytime you're taking the antibiotics, you're flattening everything. And so you start over. And I'm not saying antibiotics are life-saving. I always I think there's no shame here, right? It's just like, oh, of course, duh. You kill all the grass and the weeds are going to grow back. So you certainly have dysbiosis and poor digestion upstream and downstream. So it's a whole like top to bottom approach overall. It would take probably a few months to correct.
This has been really interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
And the other thing, and stress is always a self-limiting factor. And I think this is where relapse prevention, which is to me the last step, is really important. Helping people understand how stress will sometimes create some hiccups in life. And when you catch it before it's significant, you can course correct more quickly overall. I hope that's helpful too, just because stress will suppress digestive enzyme production. And whether we think so or not, it's just life. It happens. And so it's like, cool. It's all like, boils down to, again, part of relapse prevention is earlier assessment and awareness. And how else can you assess and become more aware more quickly than having a higher education around it, right? So it's like, Leah, until the joint pain gets severe. As humans, we're motivated to change by inspiration or desperation. Usually a symptom will get really bad before we do something about it. But then the next time around, we can catch it earlier and course correct it sooner when it's less severe.
Right.
Where can people find you if they wanted to? Do you see people over online or?
Yeah. Do you see people on Zoom?
Yep, I do. So my website is christabiegler.com, but I also have a nerdy podcast, and I have a little like hot tip for you guys that there's on my website, you can click on the podcast button, and then underneath the player is some specific Spotify playlists for specific issues. So like Leah, there's a mold one, and we have to manually update it and add episodes. There's a handful that we've done just recently, like just last week I did one that was really brief, like here's the starting points if you're feeling like you're dealing with that. But if you have specific interest around specific topics, I have specific playlists around those topics.
What's your podcast called?
It's called The Less Stressed Life.
The Less Stressed Life, okay.
Which was sort of a synonym for inflammation once upon a time, but it's been a beautiful umbrella to talk about all the things, which has been a gift.
Oh my gosh, so you have topics on inflammation too then, right?
Yeah, my handle on Instagram is anti-inflammatory nutritionist. So inflammation is simply a umbrella term.
We needed to have you back.
Well, we just talked about ourselves this whole issue.
I know.
Hopefully you got a lot out of it. I hope.
Oh my God,
definitely.
It is so, to be honest, it's really fun to connect the dots, right? Especially if you've been running into walls before that. So I have a really good training I just finished last month that kind of goes through sort of how I would triage and go through the steps, sort of, it's not a chart as you asked Leah, but it kind of takes people through the steps of like, here are sort of the issues in our industry, and here are some of the solutions around that. And I worked on that for like half this year, so I'm proud of it. So check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Your time, and I learned a ton, and
that's always the best.
Thanks again. You're wonderful.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. All the information provided is meant for education and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your physician before making any changes.
If you liked this episode, please give us a 5-star review. Also, share this episode with someone who you think would enjoy it. If you have topics you want us to investigate, please message us. Thanks.